All right, welcome to another book club. I am here with Allie. We are live on TikTok. We are live on YouTube as well, discussing chapters 11 through 15 of Keys to the Kingdom. 11 through 15 of Keys to the Kingdom. And you can call in 567-777-2779. This is the book all about Michael Eisner's ascent to the office of the CEO of the Walt Disney Company. Give us a call, 567-777-2779. We're going to talk about the things that we read the other night. We're going to keep it to these 5 chapters. We're going to add another show to the format so we can spend some more time discussing what we read the other night. And quite frankly, because I was late to read the rest of the chapters, Allie, but that's okay because there's so much to unpack here. And let's just get right into it. Good to see you, hear you. How have you been?
I have been great. Hello. I hope that you are doing great as well, getting ready for your upcoming trip.
I am very excited for Tokyo.
Yeah, I can't wait for you. I'm jealous. I'll just come fit in your suitcase and then you can take me with.
Listen, the monkey is occupying enough space. He's got so much. He's got luggage, you know. I mean, he's ready to roll. I hope we're sounding good over on YouTube and over on TikTok. How are you, Rob and Jim and Natalie? Good to see you. If you're on TikTok, please keep sharing the live. If you're on YouTube, feel free to jump in the comments. The comments are on YouTube, Allie. And of course, 567-777-2779. Allie, when we start here at this particular section of the book, we are introduced to a dormant Walt Disney Company under the tutelage of Ron Miller. And Ron Miller has failed to exploit the archives of the Walt Disney Company. The parks are faltering. They haven't built a hotel in Orlando in a decade, while subsequent theme park businesses are booming. Hotels in the area are booming, and Disney's just coasting, hasn't raised ticket prices in the park for quite some time. They're really doing nothing, and the future is so uncertain. They don't know if they're looking for new leadership, an acquisition, or facing a hostile takeover. And that's just where we start, Allie.
Yeah, that's not only a lot happens even just in the first couple of pages, I would say. Again, you mentioned the hostile takeover. Nobody's even expecting that. And to your point, the whole company at this point is behind compared to everything surrounding it. So there's a lot to cover. And this is the first time, too, that Eisner is really going to be involved in the actual Walt Disney Company. So that's super exciting to see where it started before he came in to then over the next couple of chapters in the book of how quickly he expedited revenue and changed things for the company overall.
Not to mention he had to fight for the position. He was packaged with Frank Wells and presented to the board, and the company is in such disarray that they kind of keep going back and forth with whether or not to even consider Eisner. So it wasn't just sort of like, hey, we want you to come take care of this company and shepherd us into the future. It really came down to him having to advocate for himself. And I think in the long run, you know, the company benefited from that tenacity, because that's the kind of sort of abrasive desire to succeed that Michael Eisner brought to the table, which is why suddenly so many things started happening at once at the company.
Yeah, there were so many people who were completely against him taking over, saying that, you know, they didn't think that he had enough experience behind him. Everyone, of course, it always comes up that he was a little off. And I mean, he called people like Bass to literally sell himself to convince everybody. By the time that they went to the board, it was a unanimous decision. And that took a lot of effort from him to really sell himself and to convince everybody and come up with ideas from a creative aspect, but then also, of course, it's going to bring in the extra revenue. But he really worked very hard, and he sold himself well on that, especially once Paramount was kind of dropping down there.
Well, and so bringing up Paramount makes me think of the Universal of it all, because one of the first major park things that Eisner chooses to do is to build MGM Studios in Orlando. And MGM Studios was really an arms race to beat Universal at their own game. And it's alleged in this book that Eisner had access to all of those internal documents on the Universal side from his Paramount days as to what they were intending to build, because they had been exposed to it over there. They had been pitched the idea. So Eisner was accused of taking an idea, albeit not an original one, because Universal already had a presence in Hollywood. But the MGM expansion was really predicated on crushing the competition. It was really... And Allie, what's kind of interesting to me is almost everything that goes down in this book is based off of either ego or relationships, and sometimes both.
Oh, there's so much ego, I would say, and especially just like cockiness. But that comes with confidence, right? You can't be successful, in my opinion, especially in this type of environment, if you are not standing true and you're selling yourself and you're holding to your own what you bring to the table. You'll easily get run over by everybody else, because it's really a dog-eat-dog world. I mean, even his relationship with Wells, they said that it was kind of a marriage situation, but he also was super quick to be like, hey, if you need it, I can get Wells out of here, no problem. So going back to the MGM, I mean, when it came to even the Backlot tour and that whole situation, trying to get the governor on the same page there, that took a while. And then the Great Movie Ride, getting all of those, again, you have to know people, getting all of those contracts and allowing those movies to be incorporated into a Disney ride or event or show was difficult. But it came to, again, those two things of, I'm strong, I know that I'm going to fight for what I want, but then also, who do I know and who's going to get me there cheaply, because cost is always a factor. And I think that he did a good job of doing those contracts cheaply and making them kind of come to Disney instead of Disney coming to them.
Which is really, so let's unpack that for a minute, because there's a couple things that come to mind. And that's probably why Eisner and Disney at the time were such a strong fit, because Disney was very good at getting things for nothing by trading, perceived access to Disney. And they talk about this time and time again in the book. Disney was also very good at doing the same to its cast members, to its employees. We enter in this chapter where Disney is asking their cast members at Disneyland to take a pay cut to help save the company. So Disney has historically been a very cheap entity. Eisner is very much about getting things on the cheap, whether we get into the part of the book where he's talking about trying to get feature-length animation at TV prices, and we can talk about the math on that later because that's astounding, or he's talking about getting the rights to Star Wars and Indiana Jones from George Lucas for $1 million a year, Allie. I don't care what year it is. $1 million a year for the rights to Star Wars and Indiana Jones in the theme parks. He cut that deal with George Lucas.
I mean, that deal alone, can you imagine even just one of those movies going for $1 million is still underrated. So having both of them for that deal, to me, is insanity. And it says, too, in the book, there's a quote that says, there's Disney magic. It's not that we were taking advantage of people outright, but people wanted to be taken advantage of. And that's simply, it circles everything back, right? Of they just wanted a piece to be involved in Disney.
Yeah, and so to Eisner's credit, he comes in, he starts exploiting things that haven't seen the light of day in for Lord knows how long, okay? But then he starts pushing into new areas and pushing rather quickly. And you really, whether you agree or disagree with some of the decisions he goes on to make in this book beyond the chapters we're talking about today, you have to appreciate the fact that this man comes into a company that is completely, on its way out. Because quite frankly, Disney was on its way out before Eisner came in. I mean, Disney was either going to get taken over hostily, was being acquired by oil men, Now I see Zach saying he can't hear anything, but I'm gonna sense that everybody else is okay because I'm looking at the comments otherwise, and it looks like we're good. So Disney doesn't know what's happening, or are they getting new leadership, all while trying to sort of satiate the Walt family. And that doesn't just mean the bloodline. That means, thank you, folks. That means just also people within the company. So, and Eisner starts to learn what that really means. He starts to value Imagineering, and he starts to create those deals using the things he learned at Paramount. Now, what I think is interesting to me, Allie, and you touched on it, you called it a marriage between Frank Wells and Michael Eisner. Michael Eisner almost provided cover for Frank Wells. Frank Wells was looking for a job, couldn't fail the way he failed at Warner's. So as much as he was a rock to Eisner, Eisner was his cover.
Oh, Eisner did everything. I would say that's why he was kind of the backbone, right? So Eisner really ran the ship, but Wells admitted multiple times that he couldn't even organize his day correctly. He was falling asleep in meetings. He couldn't, he had to work over hours continuously. And Eisner kind of came with the ideas and everything. Wells was just kind of his support. I'm almost thinking of like Batman and Robin, right? He was kind of his buddy in the background, but he still did a lot. But I would say that Eisner definitely, he needed him, but just in a different credit where he really ran the ship and Wells asked additional questions behind him.
And it really goes to show you how these executives have the ability to influence the creative process, because they started to take, and Eisner does this even before Disney, they start to take their approach from one aspect of the business and apply it to another, right? So they start to take the TV approach to things and apply it to filmmaking. They start to apply it to theme park development. Eisner's in there pitching. They're literally in the trenches with creative pitching ideas. So many times I think these executives, get sort of underappreciated, and obviously there are things you can say about their executive level compensation and things like that. But when it comes to their impact, sometimes I do think they're undervalued. And I think Eisner and Frank Wells were a lifeline to Disney at this point. And he goes on to bring in Katzenberg. And Katzenberg goes on in many ways, Allie, to reinvigorate feature-length animation. Not just from the outside, but from the inside. I mean, he tells these folks, you need to start writing scripts. We can save a lot of time and a lot of money if you start writing scripts. They weren't writing scripts for animated movies. They were storyboarding everything.
Which I have never made a movie, obviously, before, but I would say that is, I'm sure, not time effective or efficient in any manner. I would say that you should probably start with the script and then go from there. But again, who am I? But I think that even just when it comes to the TV and everything, that's a whole different discussion. But they definitely were not all on the same page for that. So getting even just the animation and the TV and then the film writing, just all on the same level with the same level of almost, how do I want to put it? Urgency almost around it of what should happen where, and then also at the same point concentrating on how much money is being spent, because I think that they always had a budget for anything that they were creating, and then it went 3 or 4 times completely over it, and that's where the problems really arose.
What attraction were they talking about? Because you're talking about workflow and timelines. What attraction were they talking about that Imagineers couldn't open on time and they missed the whole promotion in the park?
That was Space Tours, I believe. Space Tours had a lot of issues when that came around.
Wait, Star Tours did?
Star Tours, yeah. Why am I saying Space Tours?
No, that's fine.
Star Tours, let me find it.
So the other thing that was interesting to me about Star Tours, while you looked that up, is it was originally intended to be a 20-minute ride. Can you imagine that as a 20-minute ride? But that was something I think Eisner was pushing for, and then at some point, they go back and they go back and forth. But to think that this is the CEO of the company getting involved at that level, but the company needed it. So I find that kind of stuff fascinating. There was something where Imagineering failed to deliver. They missed their mark. I think it was Splash Mountain, Alley. I think
It was both. So Star Tours was set to open November 1986, and it did not open until January 1987, and it missed the profitable season. So there were a couple of things. Splash Mountain definitely had some opportunities as well where the ride wasn't even working correctly. That had to be adjusted. But what's interesting too about Splash Mountain is Eisner was the one who said that they needed to have a camera at the drop, which I find interesting. I wonder if there were any other rides, or this was the first ride that actually had a camera that took the pictures, because that made them a lot of profit.
Well, it reads like that was the beginning of PhotoPass, right? So,
yep.
Yeah, think about that. So there are these innovations, and I quite frankly, I think adding stores, adding merchandise centers to the end of every ride was a brilliant move. I really do, especially because then eventually that gets you ride specific merchandise, right? And more of it. But so what was interesting to me about all of that was they come into the company at a time when Imagineering are basically considered like the outcasts, the brats. And they, prior to Eisner and Wells, Imagineering was using a lot of contractors to get work done to subsidize things. It sounded like that was a company edict, not so much an Imagineering decision. So Imagineering was really sort of lost in the company. And over time, Wells and Eisner discover what the value of Imagineering truly is and develop things like, again, like Star Tours, Tower, doing things and spending money in ways that don't necessarily yield a direct profit. Imagineering, as it states in there, I mean, they were building all sorts of things that never saw the light of day. And that's money that's never recovered, but it was all towards pushing the bounds. And some of the things Imagineering was doing was just exercise to break convention. So it was kind of cool that by the time Eisner and Wells, and I know I'm getting ahead of these chapters, but I've read this book before, it's kind of cool that by the time Eisner and Wells become those kids in the candy store, Eisner starts bringing his child to work, Allie, and showing him rides in Imagineering. His son literally pointed at Star Tours and was like, that one. And literally was the reason that Eisner commissioned Star Tours to be made, because his son thought it would be cool. Like, so there's...
And I want to touch on that too, because that I think is important, right? Because if the children, I mean, in the Revenous Rat chapter, Eisner mentioned that his own kids favored Knott's Berry Farm over Disney because it had more exciting rides. So if you're not getting your children into the park to get what they're seeing and their impression and their take and their comments on everything, I don't think that it would be as successful. Because even if you are the head of a corporation and your own family doesn't like the actual park that you are overseeing, I think that that's step one of the problem, right? Of you're seeing something different than what I'm seeing, so I need to have your opinion and your insight as well, because that's really what Disney is based off of, is family. And if your whole family's not enjoying the experience, that's not going to be a success. And I think that that's where it was in the beginning of the chapters of, like you said, Disney was not in a good place at this point. It was dull. It was outdated, in my opinion, and it wasn't going anywhere. So it's good that he started bringing his child to work, because I think that brought a whole new light and a whole new incentive. I think that in any environment, if you are in the box for too long, you can't think outside of it, and you're not coming with new creative ideas.
Well, and you're talking about bringing fresh blood into the company, okay, which I think the company could use today. But he's not only bringing in, they're not only bringing in fresh blood, but he's then smart enough to kind of look through the lens of his biggest audience, right? And I think that speaks to the family man. When they were considering hiring the pair, the board looked at Wells as the stable one and Eisner as the brash one, because outwardly Wells presented as the businessman, the stable one, the one that could appeal to Wall Street, could appeal to investors, because he looked the part. Eisner kind of had his hair all over the place, was loud and brash, would say whatever was on his mind, was a little all over the place, and he was perceived to sort of be the problem. When in all actuality, Wells was the one leaving his family at home to climb all these summits around the world, take all these risks, which, spoiler alert, ultimately leads to his demise. Okay, and Eisner is turning down meetings because he's got to make sure he's at his son's hockey game or get his daughter to college. Eisner was the consummate family man. And I think in many ways, Allie, that was the secret sauce to what he brought to the Disney company, because he was able to see the value in so many of these things through the eyes of maybe not just his son, but his daughter as well. And, the Mighty Ducks are inspired by his son's hockey team.
I did not know that. I know that his son was in hockey because that was mentioned at the end of one of the chapters, but that's interesting that even, again, his family inspired something that was super successful. That's, a very successful movie.
Now, you're somebody who, when we have these conversations, is kind of looking at it through the movie side, and I'm kind of like, or the entertainment side, and I'm kind of always coming at it from the business side. So what I find interesting is the things that you pick up on that I tend to miss. And you were talking to me about some of these movies that you did or did not recognize along the way, but how sometimes you almost like forget about something and you don't realize what had to happen behind the scenes to get some of these things accomplished. And there's a lot of that in here, from Three Men and a Baby, to now suddenly the name of the movie escaped me, but it's, oh my gosh, why do I want to say Warren Beatty? But it's not. I think that, again, I might be getting ahead of myself because that was Dick Tracy. You know what I'm talking about. And there's all these.
Yeah.
Who was it? It wasn't Beatty. It was.
I'm trying to find. No, it wasn't. It was both. They were both referenced together too. And I know that they talked about Good Morning Vietnam, and that's definitely not it.
Well, there was a shift there for Disney to go from getting like old stars to spending a little bit more money on more bankable stars. But it was risks taken based off of relationships, and then going back to the sort of the cheapness of it all. Then Disney would not ever like thank anybody. They wouldn't send any sort of like, traditionally what you do is if you hire somebody to make a movie and the movie's successful and you got them for a deal and the movie's really successful, you either give them a bonus, buy them a car, give them a great next deal, whatever it is. And Disney wouldn't do that stuff.
No, that was mentioned in the book too, that I can't remember what movie it was. They referenced so many movies in these couple chapters and shows, but they were celebrating. I think it might have been Good Morning Vietnam, to be honest with you. And they went to celebrate and they were handed a check, and it was basically just cutting even of what the expenses they would have paid out. So they did not get, they were expecting a bonus.
Right.
And it wasn't it.
They thought, so he slides the envelope across the table. I forget who was actually involved in this. I don't think it was Eisner directly. Maybe it was. And no, it was probably the head of that division. But they're like, oh, here's an envelope. And they're like, oh, cool, a bonus. And it was just an advance on what they were already owed.
Yeah.
So yep. Disney, even under Eisner and Wells, took a minute to gain their footing when it came to bringing in stars, because Disney was more used to like making stars, reviving stars, and then leaving them out for pasture again. And Disney's mentality was, listen, if you can get a better deal somewhere else, go somewhere else. You're the reason that you're back. We're the reason you're back on the map.
Yeah, it's that kind of mentality of, I actually don't need you. I can find somebody else. It's kind of when you have a disgruntled customer and they're like, I'm never coming here again. They're like, okay, that's fine. We've got other people lined up that would do so much more and would take less.
And I hate to say it, but, well, I see Mark's comment. We could really use another Michael Eisner. I actually very much agree with that statement. And one of the things that's interesting to point out too, is Imagineering's attitude towards the guest alley is almost the same. Imagineering is talking about dumbing things down for the guests. They're talking about how the guests are basically the problem.
Dumb as post is what they said. Right. The guests are dumb as post.
Right.
And they had zero respect, and the guests are stupid, they're destructive, and the only thing that they liked about the guests is that they have pockets of money, which that's crazy to me, because if you think about it, Eisner was looking at it from the creative aspect of, he was super hesitant to raise ticket prices, right? They wanted They went from, hey, I want to raise it to $1 more. And then they came back of, I want to raise it to $5 more. And his immediate response was, okay, but we can't do that right away. It's going to be over the course of 2 years. And so that was not his mentality, that the guests are all about the money. He understood that there was an opportunity with the money and they were clearly undervaluing ticket prices and everything, but he did not want to go against the complete guest experience.
And I think that's sort of what the underlying, to me, the underlying aspect of all of this that fascinates me the most is how much contrast there is between the reality of what was going on and what was perceived to be going on. The things that were going on behind the scenes, the levers that were being pulled and the reasons they were being pulled weren't for the reasons you would think. And it doesn't mean there wasn't success in making some of these decisions. But again, going back to the expansion in Orlando, you know, that was almost a vendetta, right? So you're doing it to benefit the company, but you're also doing it to satiate your ego and to take a jab at a former coworker or a former boss or whomever. So it's one of those things where, again, you look at it and you look at the decisions at the time that were being made and you go, oh, okay, well, maybe Eisner was too brash with what he was doing. Maybe he was expanding too fast. Euro Disney comes out of the gate as a huge failure. But at the same time, what was Disney doing beforehand? They were sitting idle. The heart and soul of the company, which is animation and Imagineering, were both dormant. The attitude coming out of Imagineering was that the guests were a problem. So where was the passion? Where was the desire to sort of honor Walt's legacy? And I would argue that the only person that actually carried that desire beside Roy Jr., who obviously wasn't eloquent enough to execute on it, was in fact Michael Eisner. Michael Eisner brings back Sunday nights. He brings back the wonderful world of Disney, puts himself in the chair, puts himself in front of the camera, but he brings it back. You know, at the time that we enter the Disney Corporation in this story, they wouldn't even cross market. They were spending so much money on the Disney Channel that they wouldn't even do a Sunday night program for fear of eroding the audience on the Disney Channel, as opposed to knowing that any promo for the brand is good for business. So Disney was in dire straits. Who's going to come in and fix that? To Mark's point, we need that now, because it's the complacency, and you're seeing a lot of that in the parks today. It is the complacency. It is the lack of respect for the guests that I think is outweighing the desire to tell good stories and make creative-based decisions. It's sort of just like, we can milk the guests. You know, like you said, Eisner said, no. We're not doing a $5 increase right away. We'll do an incremental increase, but we're not going to hit them hard like that. It won't be good. We'll get there. We don't need to be greedy. We'll get there.
Can you imagine how different everything would be? I mean, if you think about the parks right now, how quickly expenses have gone up and benefits have really been stripped at an incredibly fast rate. If we had somebody like Eisner in it right now, I wonder how different that would look. Because I think that we are looking to expand it. I know that D23 happened, last month or maybe
a couple weeks ago?
2 weeks ago, maybe? Yeah, a couple weeks ago. So we're talking about all these different changes and everything, but realistically, what is super new? Are we challenging ourselves enough? In my opinion, no. Do we need another test track retheme? Is that going to be the highest priority? I mean, I love the old test track, but I wouldn't say that is going to necessarily bring people in as much as something completely new and different, especially when ticket prices and everything are going up. I think that right now we're looking too much on the cost side of it and getting more revenue, as opposed to the actual Imagineering side of how are we making the parks different, how are we making them new, and how are we enticing people to come back.
Well, the decisions are data driven. They are driven by bottom line decision making, appealing shareholders. The risks aren't there. Eisner was willing to take the risks because the company was already at rock bottom. You know, at a certain point during Eisner's tenure, his early days, the stock saw something around $1.20 a share as a high. It probably went, I know it went higher, but now it's lower than that. So I just keep going back because, when I was younger, the MO was to hate Eisner. Oh, Michael Eisner destroyed the Walt Disney Company. Michael Eisner was the worst CEO Michael Eisner saved the Walt Disney Company with the help of Frank Wells. And I would love to hear what you think about that. 567-777-2779. And he was savvy enough to maybe not outwardly admit his mistakes, Allie, but he knew when to back away from the table. One of the things that I find very fascinating is the Marriott deal. Again, we start these chapters at a time where the Walt Disney Resort hadn't seen a hotel expansion in close to a decade, maybe even longer. Eisner comes along and tries to do a deal with Marriott. Marriott jumps on the deal. Now, as savvy as Eisner is to make a good deal for himself with George Lucas, he doesn't know what he's doing with Marriott, right? He doesn't know the value. And Eisner's afraid that suddenly he's made a good deal for Marriott and a bad deal for Disney. So what does he do? He asks Marriott, and correct me anywhere along the way here, Allie, please. He asked Marriott to kick in $60 million to fund a pavilion in Epcot. And he does this just to see if Marriott pushes back or goes along with it. Marriott immediately says yes, and Eisner knows he's structured way too good of a deal for Marriott and not a good enough deal for Disney, and walks away from the table. Now that is business brilliance.
Yeah. Yep. You were so close. $70 million deal. And then
what's
the
10
deal
million?
that
What's 10 million between friends?
Yeah, 10 million. Yeah. Nothing. That's money in the couch.
Yeah.
But
it's a couple more direct-to-video releases.
Yeah. He let the Marriott go ahead and build the Dolphin and the Swan. And I know that we talked about it before, but in my opinion, if that deal completely went through, if Marriott went on to build even more hotels with Disney, I don't know if it would give the same vibe and environment that the current Disney resorts give. I'm thinking of Pop Century, Art of Animation, All Star Sports, All Star Movies. A lot of those resorts are very heavy Disney focused, and especially for children, I think that those are the types of hotels that usually people will gravitate to because of the very Disney decorations, right? You've got those huge characters outside the rooms, and the rooms are very heavily themed. And the Dolphin and the Swan, they are very, I've never stayed in them, but I've been inside them for dinners and everything, but they are very like a classic upscale hotel. And I don't know, in my opinion, I think that it would change the overall staying at a Disney resort very different. Because I would look at it as, I can stay on property, but I'm not getting anything different than if I was going to be staying off property at another, maybe like a Hilton that's down the street, right?
Well, and I think for Eisner, the thought was, can I make a deal here where we can basically get some free money for licensing, I don't know if you would call it licensing, but for basically letting people build hotels on our property. So it is sort of almost like a licensing structure. But I think at first to him, that would have been the easy money. But you're giving away so much to the hotel companies, that he thought, no, well, let's do this in-house. Let's control it. Let's own all the profits. Why are we going to let these folks piggyback off of us? People are already piggybacking off of Disney at this point all around Orlando, and Disney has been just sitting there allowing it to happen for years without pushing back, at least internally, to expand. And I think it's said in the books that, listen, not only are you going to benefit from people visiting the parks more because the hotels that you add on property are going to allow more people to do that, but the hotels themselves will turn a profit. So why share that profit with Marriott? So smart to back out of that deal. And in many ways, that's the same logic Universal used to back out of the deal with MGM. Because before it was MGM Studios, Universal entertained the idea of teaming up with Disney and licensing their Universal properties to Disney. At one point, Disney discussed buying Universal. And you would have had Universal integrated into what is now Hollywood Studios as opposed to MGM. So you got to think about how all of those little pieces affect things. The Great Movie Ride would have been very different with Universal properties. And again, a lot of that, Allie, is relationships and ego. The fact that he was able to, Ron Miller could not get George Lucas to come to the table to integrate Star Wars properties into the theme park. Eisner could, because Eisner gave him a heck of a deal when it came to Raiders of the Lost Ark when he was over at Paramount. That deal sent a ripple through the film and television industry. Other CEOs were sending Eisner messages saying that he was destroying the industry by giving talent such a large deal, but it paid dividends for Paramount with Raiders. And it was only because of that relationship that when he got to Disney, Lucas met with him to discuss integrating Lucasfilm properties into the park. That wasn't going to happen under Ron Miller. Lucas didn't like Ron Miller. So then what happens? That relationship that was built and trusted, Eisner completely exploits for that $1 million a year deal. Now Lucas is PO'd, right? Lucas gets his hands in so many things at the parks at once. Okay, one of them being Captain EO. And he gets his friend Francis Ford Coppola the job. Now, this is what relationships really mean in the entertainment industry. Francis Ford Coppola discovered George Lucas. Francis Ford Coppola allowed George Lucas to make THX 1138 a remake into a feature film from a student film. Francis Ford Coppola put Lucas on the map. But by the time Lucas is doing this deal with Disney, Coppola is dead in the water. So Lucas agrees to produce Captain EO if Coppola can direct it. But it is garbage. It is a disaster, Allie. But Lucas is controlling the special effects, which means Lucas is holding everything. Lucas knows he has a disaster on his hands and is hiding it all from Eisner. Okay, finally they squeeze out a few reshoots. They get whatever they got to get done with Michael Jackson, and they salvage Captain EO. But it was DOA when it was first done, because even though he had leveraged, his own relationship with Eisner to bring in his buddy Coppola, Coppola destroyed it. So you have all these relationships going on behind the scenes. Ovitz, and I'm going off on a tangent now, Ovitz, who starts CAA, okay, which is one of the newest talent agencies in town, the newest talent agency in town, is trying to get their actors, their writers, their producers over to Disney. And despite being personal friends with Ovitz, hanging out with him on vacation, Eisner doesn't want to do business with him. And in fact, the only time Eisner decides to do business with Ovitz is when he knows if he shows that Disney's doing business with a brand new agency on the block, that it will hurt business for all the other agencies around town and create chaos. So these moves, generally speaking, are made by relationships and ego and never about creativity or the bottom dollar. Those very rarely come into play at this level. And it's fascinating to me how we, as the consumer, reap the benefits. All of these movies, all of these things that get commissioned, Star Tours getting commissioned, Tower getting commissioned, the whole entire Hollywood Studios, that's an arms race against Universal. That is an attempt to tick off somebody's former mentor, I believe. So these aren't this isn't like, hey, we should expand and it'll be great and let's make a living studio because that's what the people want or need. It's like, no, I hated that guy when I worked for him. So I have power now and I have money now and I'm gonna really shiv him in the side, So there's an underbelly.
And I think that's why so many things like that didn't go as planned. For example, like you mentioned, Captain EO, that was a train wreck when it first happened. Star Tours didn't necessarily open. One, it didn't open even on time or anything, but I think it's because the ego side maybe took over more of the actual management side of ensuring that things were getting done correctly. And there were a couple of times for that. I can't remember what exactly ride it was, but same thing, the Imagineers even mentioned this would have gone a lot better if management was actually taking a look at what was happening.
But at the same time, Imagineering was the first ones. I was going to say, Imagineering is the first ones to overspend. I mean, they were citing that throughout these chapters too. Yeah. So there's a push and pull. Like you make me think of the whole Swan and the Dolphin again, because they told Eisner, like, this is going to be unsightly from inside the World Showcase, and he didn't care. He thought it was breaking convention. And then he saw it and was like, well, what can we do to fix this?
Yep. And that goes back to, he's not necessarily admitting that he's wrong, but he is. He's saying, you know what, we took a risk, but now you look behind France and you can see this ginormous hotel behind it, and you're destroying the entire illusion that you're actually in Paris.
Well, look what he goes on to do with California Adventure. The first iteration of California Adventure breaks all convention. And when it comes to Walt's ideals, you know, like California Adventure, there was no berm. You can see right out into the city. Everything about California Adventure was the antithesis of what Disneyland was meant to be. So, but again, you have to take risks, right? You have to fail to succeed, as cliche as that is. So if I'm just going to pick an arbitrary number, okay? But if 60% of the things that he attempted to do when he first took over Disney worked, then that would be enough. I mean, they were talking about the value of just that incremental ticket price, or raising the prices incrementally. Just that little price hike, what was a significant impact on the bottom line. Releasing movies on home video. They didn't think at first people would even care. Imagine that. I mean, think about how many times I don't have kids. Okay. I have a step kid. She's grown, but like, I don't have any little ones or anything running around here in Florida. So I don't know how many times y'all have seen Frozen, but imagine the concept that these executives thought, Allie, that home video might not work, that people didn't need to have the movie at home. And think about like how different that would be. So it's interesting to me to see how two outsiders are able to come into a company, disrupt norms, especially with the help of Katzenberg. I mean, we didn't even really touch on Katzenberg, but Katzenberg comes in and revitalizes the animation department, and we'll get to that in these future chapters, because him coming in there, Katzenberg, and doing what he does leads to the Renaissance era. It leads to the Little Mermaid. It leads to Aladdin. It leads to the Lion King and Beauty and the Beast. And so these guys, for however much they are perceived to be sort of the bad guys, were brash enough and bold enough to take the chances. And I can't fault Eisner for like putting his face on everything and sort of wanting to be the Walt. He knew he was never going to be the Walt, but he also knew what the company was about and what the company needed. And I think in many ways, he got a better sense of that than Roy Jr. had at the time, because Roy Jr. was floundering. I mean, they talk about Roy Jr. not even showing up to work. He would only just pop in at the end of a process and like give his 2 cents and leave. So,
just not even show up at all and just send over meeting notes, and everyone's confused on, you can't even have a conversation with it at that point.
And who was he blowing off in meetings? Was it Katzenberg Roy was blowing off in meetings? Because they were doing
Yeah, I feel like it was Katzenberg, but that might have been in a later chapter. I might have been reading ahead. But yeah, he was just, hey, I'm not going to show up to this meeting. Here you go. Here are my notes. These are my thoughts.
So if you're contrasting your two leadership options, and you've got Ron Miller, who, sure, it's albeit by marriage, but he's in the bloodline, okay? So I guess technically he's not in the bloodline at all. But you know what I'm saying. He's in the family, right?
Yeah.
He's in the family. Not doing anything, has no idea, former football player, has no idea how to run the company, is letting the company sit idle, has no sense of direction, doesn't even know what his exit strategy is. And you trade that, or you contrast that to Eisner and Wells. Wells, who is the counterbalance, Eisner, who is the bull in the china shop and isn't afraid to show it. At least with the bull in the china shop, you're getting friction, and friction creates motion, and motion is progress, and that's how you get things done. But to just sit there at the top like Ron Miller was and do nothing and let the company implode, I'm sorry. I don't see how Eisner's the bad guy. I think Ron Miller got off easy. I think historically, Ron Miller should be remembered for dropping the ball, no pun intended, okay? And Michael Eisner should be celebrated for rescuing the company. Because again, Growing up,
Yep.
the narrative was always Eisner was the bad guy. He put the gift shops at the end of the rides. He ruined the Disney experience. No, he saved the company. And we're not even done the book.
Yeah, I mean, even I know we haven't. I don't want to jump ahead too much for like the Little Mermaid and everything, but even when it came to merchandise for the actual shows and movies that were coming out, that wasn't heavily marketed beforehand. And even with Splash Mountain, that wasn't before Eisner. That wasn't really a thing of, hey, I'm going to build rides or attractions based off of things that were successful that were produced. And I think that all ties together. I mean, I think that he did so much creativity. I mean, and yes, of course, when he came in, he did want to change a lot of things and do a lot of things at once. He was talking about Euro Disney, Typhoon Lagoon. But to your point before, you said it a while back, but nothing was happening. So when, of course, anything that you bring to the table when you're providing suggestions based off of a company that hasn't been changing in the last couple of years, you're going to think that there's too much changing at once. But it's strange that they were so quick to say that his creativity ideas were too much at once, but anything that had to do with like cost and marketing was not done quick enough.
You know, when we started this idea for the show, and I think you and Monty had the idea, and then we got into sort of the nitty gritty, and we said, well, let's do 10 chapters at a time. Let's keep it conversational, not a club where people have to sign up. You know, if somebody doesn't feel like they want to call in, and please do call in. I want to hear what you have to say. I don't care how off topic it is. The notion that we could cover 10 chapters in an hour, in hindsight, is a bit ridiculous, because we're talking about 5 chapters here that in of themselves are already covering a massive change for this company. And there's so much more that lay ahead. And again, having the benefit of read this book and knowing what lay ahead, I do like the idea now that we can actually, whether it was planned or not, kind of just slow this down, add another episode, go 5 chapters at a time. Because what's coming up next, and then what's coming up after that, it's so, without getting too deep into it, it's the Renaissance era of Disney animation. It's the international park expansion. Okay. And spoiler alert, it's the death of Frank Wells. Now, the death of Frank Wells doesn't just affect Eisner and the Walt Disney Company. That has an impact on Hollywood that I think many people don't even realize. And you're talking about the birth of DreamWorks, and then subsequently DreamWorks Animation and the Shrek movies. All of this comes off the death of Frank Wells. So again, I like a broken record, Allie, it's fascinating to me how the relationships behind the scenes are really driving what we all as consumers benefit from. Oh, and not to mention, by the way, Roger Rabbit. There's so much about Roger Rabbit coming up.
Yes.
It's really, I hope people like this, and I hope we're not going too fast. Again, I think we're slowing down a little bit, so that's cool. I wonder if we could even go more in depth here. I'm questioning if there's a better way to do this in the future with other books, because I really do want people to read along, and I want to hear what they think. I'm curious from all of you what your take on Michael Eisner was prior to reading this, and what your take on Michael Eisner is as you're reading this. And again, Allie, I don't know where you stood in the beginning. I mean, you told me the other day you didn't even know if he was still alive, Michael Eisner. So where were you at prior to this?
I didn't even know he existed, to be honest with you. I think that's why our conversations are always different, is because I do not know too much about Disney's backstory, and I've never read this book before. So this is my first time, and you're coming into a place of, you've worked for Disney, you understand the backstory and the history and everything of it. You've read the book before. And for me, again, just reading from the title, I thought that I was supposed to hate Michael Eisner, because how the title reads, it's very like, okay, Michael Eisner is the king and he squished everybody to get there. And even, I think I mentioned it maybe last talk show, but my perception changed immediately, because I don't get that impression at all. And I still think in some points it's almost read or written in a way that, hey, he was this crazy man who challenged everybody and was just very blunt, and everybody else looked at the actual business side of it, where he just came in with these crazy ideas. But I think that that's what it was mentioned too. That's what Walt was like as well. Walt challenged everything. He came in with crazy ideas and they worked out. Some did, some didn't. And then they owned it and then moved forward and learned from it.
They
So I
even
would
say
say
that in the
in
book,
the beginning, I thought that I was supposed to hate him. Yep, I was supposed to hate him. And I definitely don't. I think that he came with a fresh perspective and is exactly what the company needed. And that's, I mean, his first year, he made a profit. He got his bonus, and the revenue of the overall company went a lot better than it was the previous years. So, so far, I think that he is definitely in the right.
Well, you know how I feel. And I'm looking at the comments. So if you're wondering where you can get the book, if you're wondering how you can catch up, so you have a couple options. If you go to my link tree, which is on my TikTok profile, there's an Amazon storefront. There's a book club list, Keys to the Kingdom by Kim Masters. And we've been reading it on the live and putting it up on TV Remix for you to listen back. Now, I listened back to some of that the other day, Allie. I start reading so fast because I'm like, I have 5 more chapters to get to. So I'm hoping that I'll do a little bit better reading this in the future. But if you scroll down on TV Remix, you can listen to me read the book to you. I know some of it, I listened back, I cringed. I was like, wow, I'm reading a little too fast. So maybe all of this kind of slowing down thing will benefit all of it, but it's free to listen to. Just scroll down on TV Remix, or you can go to my Amazon store. And it doesn't matter. I mean, you're listening to this now, but go read it on your own, because there are parts of it you're going to want to read over and over again. I catch it myself doing that too. While I'm reading on the live, Alley, I'll drop something in a page and go back when I log off and read it again, because there are just things that click, you know, and you're like, oh gosh, that was going on, you know. And again, I don't think people realize when Eisner took over, there's this perception that Disney's always been a successful, profitable company with no worries. They were on the brink of disaster. It was just about picking their poison. So here we are again, different landscape. Stock price is sadly lower than it was at this point in the story. But here we are again in need of new leadership. And what scares me is that it might come from within. I think somebody coming in and shattering the norms is exactly what the Walt Disney Company needs right now. I think the story of Michael Eisner is a great way to reinforce that, a great reminder of that. And I hope, I mean, listen, I wish in many ways they would have brought him in as at an advisor level these last couple of years to get through the COVID of it all, you know, but I'm sure he didn't want to tarnish his own legacy. But somebody like him, somebody fresh, it doesn't matter where they come from. It really doesn't. What matters is what they're capable of. And you saw it with Eisner in his days at ABC. You saw it with his days at Paramount. And then what he goes on to do with the Walt Disney Company, even when he's doing things on the cheap and too fast and overstepping and having to redo, even when he's doing all of that, it creates a foundation for what we have now. You would not have the global Disney brand, the global park expansion that we have now if it weren't for what Eisner set out to do. Because almost all of that happened under Michael Eisner. Almost all of it. And they go on to say...
I wonder what he thinks.
Oh, of the current state?
I wonder... Yeah. Like, if we asked him, hey, what do you think is going well? What do you think is different? What do you think remains the same? I'm curious on what he would say.
Well, he chimed in, I think, during the Chapek era. I do believe he chimed in at one point. But it's one of those things where you look at it and you say, okay, right now, the company is going up against Universal again. Universal's building another gate, okay? And Disney hasn't even corrected its own internal issues. It's gotten back to that level of coasting. So who is going to, and I pick on this guy all the time, but so be it. Who is going to take over the company? Certainly not Josh D'Amaro. We don't want complacency. We don't want somebody that thinks everything he's doing is right. What I really appreciated about Eisner is that he wasn't worried about what was wrong or right. He was stuck in his convictions, and he was able to adjust. I just rather have that right now than what we've got, which is people counting money, you know, in all the wrong places. Like, take care of your boots on the ground. Take care of your cast members. You know, take care of the talent that's making you the money. Stop overpaying these executives. You know, get your compensation on the back end. You mean, look at the insane amount of money Wells and Eisner were pulling down in their first few years, and deservedly so, because they rescued the company. So I don't know. I just think about looking forward, and I hope that the company gets it together. I hope they don't get acquired, but oddly, we're in a sort of similar period as where the company was when Ron Miller was on his way out and Eisner was on his way in, and Eisner and Wells. So there is a weird parallel there. There's a lot more at stake. One of the things that I'm reminded of is that Eisner said he would never do a deal like Tokyo again. One of the first things he said there was any theme park expansion we do in the future, we're going to own, because the Tokyo deal was done to minimize risk. And the Tokyo Disney deal is basically a licensing deal with the Oriental Land Company. So Eisner said no more of that. And you know what? Even though he kind of backpedaled on that with the Marriott deal, he walked away from the table. So you're not talking about a guy that wasn't willing to admit his mistakes, whether he did it publicly or he just quietly did it and moved on. You know, he was malleable to an extent. And I think that was the benefit of Frank Wells, Allie, is that behind the scenes, Wells could rein him in.
Yeah, I agree. I was going to touch on, too, the Tokyo, because it was mentioned before when we talked about it of Disney wants to own Disney. And it was very interesting that that Tokyo deal even happened like that in the first place. But again, Euro Disney, that was not the plan.
Monty said that the book on Remix and on the Amazon store is in the video description. Thank you, Monty. I love this stuff, Allie. As you know, I could just run my mouth on it all day long. And just you and I, like, even when we were talking on the prep call, it just, we go all over the map with it because it takes you all over the map. You're talking about a major company and with tentacles so far reaching now. I mean, you're talking about real estate and film and tech and so many other investments. It'll be interesting to see what the future brings. I hope people join us along as we continue to read this book. We're going to keep this series alive. Like I said, we're going to add an episode, so check out the newsletter for more information on that. And that's all I got. And speaking of Tokyo, Allie, I can't wait. I mean, I'm out of here in a few days. I was packing yesterday, trying to get all my equipment together, my batteries charged.
I can't wait. I can't wait to see what it's like. All of the footage. I don't know. I know that they've got weird live rules. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but whatever content you produce, I am excited to see. And I'm sure that I speak for everybody. We're excited to go along with the journey with you, even if we don't actually have a plane ticket.
It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to it. Well, 3 of us are going. We'll see how many make it back. That's all I can say.
Nick's just going to hang back.
Oh, well, I was thinking Yoey, but that's fine. You know, either way. And we'll be on all formats over there.
Either
YouTube,
one.
Instagram, TikTok. Everyone's talking about all the live rules and this, that, and the other. I'm not worried about it. I'm bringing enough in terms of technology and enough in terms of, you know, being able to kind of figure this thing out on the fly. I've got redundancy. You know, I've got options.
Mm-hmm.
So we will be good, and we will be back. Allie, thank you so much. Thank you to everyone for listening. We really want to hear from you, so you can listen to this wherever you get your podcast. This will be up on YouTube in a moment. You can comment there. It's never too late to engage. Comment on YouTube if you'd like. I really am looking forward to finishing this book with you all. Be on the lookout for the updated information. We take 2 weeks off and then 2 weeks back. So after Tokyo, we pick up this show. We pick up the debate show with Kenzie. There's so much more to do here as we continue to ramp up our content output and talk all things Disney with you. Thank you so much for listening. Again, you can listen to this wherever podcasts are available, wherever you listen to your podcasts, including Spotify and iTunes. Be on the lookout for that website, Pre-Tokyo. That's coming. And we will see you real soon. Thank you, Allie. Thank you so much. Thank you, Monty, for your help on this as
Thank
well.
you.
I appreciate y'all. It's been a great time, and I will see you